My family talks about the law the way other families talk about the weather. It is the ambient atmosphere of our lives, a constant, low-pressure system of torts, precedents, and jurisdictions. My father is a Deputy Attorney General for the United States. My mother is the head of the white-collar crime division for our state. My older brother, Mark, is a special agent in the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. And my younger sister, Amelia, is a famously aggressive civil rights attorney for the DOJ. And then there is me, Thomas Reed, the family's strange and disappointing anomaly. I am a history professor. I don't build cases. I study them after they're cold. I am a man of dusty archives, faded photographs, and the quiet, forgotten stories of the past. My family's world of loud, present-tense conflict has always felt like a foreign country to me. So when my grandparents left me their small, rustic cabin on Whispering Pines Lake, it was more than an inheritance. It was an escape. It was the one place on earth that had no connection to the legalistic, high-powered world of the Reeds. It was a sanctuary of weathered wood and quiet water, a place where the only arguments were between the squirrels and the blue jays. I took a sabbatical from the university with a simple plan to repair the old cabin, write a book on local history, and finally, for the first time in my life, to be left completely and utterly alone. The first sign that my sanctuary was already under occupation came on the day I arrived. I had barely unpacked my car when a woman with a face like a clenched fist marched down my gravel driveway. She was in her late 50s, with a severe, platinum blonde haircut and a crisp, linen pantsuit that seemed wildly out of place in the rustic, wooded setting. She carried a thick, 3-ring binder, like a holy text. "I am Janice Kensington," she announced, her voice a sharp, imperious staccato. She was the president of the Whispering Pines Lake Homeowners Association, a fact she delivered with the gravitas of a queen announcing her own coronation. "And you are already in violation." I am, by nature, a non-confrontational man. My entire life has been a quiet rebellion against my family's adversarial profession. "I'm sorry," I said, offering a placating smile. "I'm Tom Reed. I just got here." "A violation of what?" Her eyes, the color of pale, cold steel, scanned my cabin with undisguised contempt. The cabin was a beautiful, historic log structure, built by my grandfather's own hands, a testament to a time of craftsmanship and care. To her, it was clearly just a mess to be managed. Her gaze landed on the hand-carved wooden sign that hung over the door, a sign that read, "The Reeds Retreat." My grandfather had carved it himself 40 years ago. "That," she said, her lip curling in a slight sneer, "that is a non-compliant exterior appendage. Article 15, Section B of the Covenants requires all signage to be of a uniform, professionally fabricated, brass plate design. That folksy piece of driftwood must be removed." I stared at her. The absurdity of the demand, a jarring note in the peaceful symphony of the woods. It was my grandfather's. I said quietly, "This is no longer your grandfather's community." "Mr. Reed," she retorted, her voice sharp as broken glass. "We are a premier, luxury community now, and we have standards. That shack of yours is a blight on the otherwise pristine sightlines of the lake. You will find that we are very serious about our standards here." She opened her binder and made a sharp, aggressive note with a gold pen. "You have 7 days to remove the sign. A formal notice of violation will be delivered tomorrow. Welcome to Whispering Pines." She turned and marched away, leaving a trail of violated peace in her wake. I stood there, the scent of pine and lake water mixing with the acrid smell of her arrogance. I felt a familiar, weary dread creep into my bones. The language she used, the casual tyranny of her tone, it was like being a child again. Sitting at the dinner table, listening to my family dissect a case, a world of rigid rules and harsh judgments I had spent my entire adult life trying to escape. I had come to this cabin to find a refuge from that world, only to discover a smaller, pettier, and somehow even more invasive version of it had been waiting for me all along. My first instinct, the one conditioned by a lifetime of trying to avoid the kind of conflict my family thrived on, was to comply. It was a silly, sentimental sign. Was it worth starting a war over? I had come to this lake for peace, not for a protracted battle with a woman who clearly had a PhD in petty tyranny. But as I looked at the sign, at the careful, loving strokes of my grandfather's carving knife, a quiet, stubborn part of me rebelled. This wasn't just a sign, it was the soul of the cabin. To take it down felt like a betrayal. So I chose a middle path. The path of the historian. I went to the archives. The next day, I drove to the county records office and spent a few hours digging through the original plat maps and founding documents for the Whispering Pines Lake development, filed in 1968. As I suspected, the original covenants were simple, focused on land use and environmental protection. The labyrinth of aesthetic rules that Janice Kensington now enforced was a recent addition, a tangled web of amendments passed by her own board over the last decade. Armed with this information, I decided not to remove the sign. Instead, I let the 7-day deadline pass. The formal notice of violation arrived, as promised, followed swiftly by a notice of a $100 fine. This was followed by a much larger and far more shocking demand, a bill for $10,000, labeled as a new member capital contribution fee, a fee I was certain was entirely fraudulent. I called my sister, Amelia, the civil rights attorney. I tried to keep my tone casual, academic. "Amy, quick hypothetical for you," I said. "If an HOA in a well-established community suddenly levies a massive, 5-figure buy-in fee on a new owner who inherited a property, a fee that was never levied before, what's the legal standing?" "It's called fraud, Tom," she said, her voice sharp and immediate. "Specifically, it's likely a violation of the Fair Housing Act, as it creates an arbitrary and discriminatory financial barrier to ownership. Why are you asking? Is someone giving you trouble?" "Just a theoretical question for a paper I'm writing," I lied. "Thanks, sis." I hung up before she could probe further. The last thing I wanted was to bring the full, overwhelming weight of the Reed family legal machine down on this small town. This was my fight, and I was determined to fight it my way. I sent a polite, registered letter to the HOA board, refusing to pay the $10,000 fee and requesting the specific bylaw and the history of its application. I also pointed out that my cabin, being an original structure, was likely grandfathered in under the original, far simpler covenants. This act of reasoned, documented resistance seemed to infuriate Janice more than any angry outburst. Her response was to unleash a full-scale assault of fines, each more absurd than the last. I received a $200 fine for the non-compliant color of the cabin itself, as the weathered, natural log finish was not on the approved palette of beige and gray paints. I received a citation for the unsafe condition of our beautiful, solid stone chimney, which she claimed needed to be inspected and certified by an HOA-approved mason. A service offered, of course, by a company she recommended. I began my own quiet investigation, the old, dormant instincts of my family slowly waking within me. I discovered that the HOA-approved mason was her brother-in-law. The landscaping company that held the exclusive and exorbitant contract for the community was owned by her nephew. This wasn't just a power trip. It was a corrupt, family-run enterprise. My file on Janice Kensington, which I had initially resisted creating, was now growing thicker by the day. It contained copies of every notice, every fraudulent fine, and my own meticulously researched counterarguments, complete with citations from the original covenants and state property law. I felt like a historian, piecing together the story of a corrupt regime from its own primary documents. The fines were a nuisance, but the underlying rot they revealed was deeply disturbing. Janice wasn't just a Karen, she was a criminal, using the HOA as a front for her own personal enrichment. And my quiet, historical cabin, a symbol of a past she was trying to erase, had become the primary obstacle to her corrupt ambitions. The battle was no longer just about a sign. It was about the soul of the entire community. Having failed to intimidate me with a barrage of fraudulent fines, Janice Kensington escalated her campaign to a more direct and personal form of attack. She could not force me out through the legitimate or illegitimate channels of her own rulebook, so she resorted to a campaign of deniable, cowardly vandalism, designed to make my life at the cabin a misery. The first casualty was my grandfather's boat. It was a beautiful, vintage wooden runabout, a classic Chris craft that he had spent years restoring. It was his pride and joy, and now it was mine. I kept it moored at our small, private dock. I came down to the lake one morning to find it gone. A surge of panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I scanned the lake and saw it, 100 yards out, drifting aimlessly, the mooring line, a clean, severed rope dangling from the dock cleat. It took me over an hour to swim out and slowly, painstakingly paddle the heavy boat back to shore with a single, emergency oar. It was a grueling, humiliating ordeal. The act was a masterpiece of deniable malice. The rope could have frayed. The knot could have come loose. But I knew. I had checked that rope the day before. It was thick, strong, and securely tied. This was a deliberate act, a message. Nothing you value is safe. I did not rage. I documented. I photographed the clean, sharp cut on the mooring line. I logged the date and time. I made a new entry in the thick, growing file. Then I called my brother, Mark, the FBI agent. Mark, a quick, off-the-record question for you, I said, trying to sound detached. What's the best way to document a pattern of low-level property damage for a potential future criminal case? We're talking chain of custody, preservation of evidence, that sort of thing. Tom, is everything okay? His voice was immediately sharp with concern, the protective older brother overriding the professional agent. Who's messing with you? It's nothing. Really. I lied. Backtracking quickly. Just some local color for the book I'm writing. A chapter on rural crime patterns. He sighed, clearly not believing me. But he gave me the information I needed. Log everything. Timestamps. High-resolution photos with a ruler for scale if you can. Keep a detailed narrative. If there are any witnesses, get their statements, signed and dated. Treat every incident like it's going to be Exhibit A in a federal trial. His advice was a cold comfort. The next attack was aimed at my grandmother's legacy. She had been an avid botanist, and she had spent years cultivating a beautiful, wild garden of native flowers and medicinal herbs along the edge of the property. It was a riot of color and life, a stark contrast to the sterile, manicured lawns of the newer homes. To Janice, it was an eyesore. One afternoon, the HOA's contracted landscaping crew, a company owned, I had discovered, by Janice's nephew arrived. They claimed they were there to clear the brush along the common area property line. I was on a research trip at the county library. When I returned, my grandmother's entire garden was gone, replaced by a raw, bleeding scar of churned mud and torn roots. I confronted the foreman, a sullen young man who refused to make eye contact. It was a mistake. He mumbled, "We got the property line wrong. Mrs. Kensington told us to clear up to the tree line." It was a lie, and we both knew it. The property line was clearly marked. This was a deliberate, targeted act of destruction, carried out under the guise of an official HOA action. It was a devastating blow, far more painful than the fraudulent fines or the drifting boat. They had erased a living piece of my family's history. That evening, I installed a network of discreet, motion-activated security cameras. They were my silent, unblinking witnesses. My quiet cabin was no longer a retreat. It was a fortified position. The historian had been forced to become a surveillance expert. My quiet war with Janice Kensington had escalated. She had destroyed something beautiful and irreplaceable. And in doing so, she had hardened my resolve in a way that no amount of petty fines ever could have. I was no longer just defending a piece of property. I was defending a memory. And I was beginning to realize that to win this fight, I would have to start thinking less like a historian and more like a Reed. With her campaigns of financial and physical intimidation failing to dislodge me, Janice Kensington turned to the ancient, ugly weapon of the cornered tyrant slander. If she couldn't force me out, she would try to poison the very ground I walked on, turning my neighbors against me with a carefully orchestrated campaign of lies and innuendo. The community's private online forum became her personal propaganda ministry, a place where she could control the narrative and paint me as a villain. Her first post was a masterpiece of manufactured concern, a friendly reminder to all residents to please keep our community safe and clean. She wrote, her use of exclamation points a sure sign of her escalating agitation. We've had some reports of a certain inherited property falling into a state of serious disrepair. While we have sympathy for those who can't afford the upkeep of a luxury property, we cannot allow one person's financial problems to become a blight on our entire community and drag down our property values. In a single, venomous paragraph, she had branded me as a poor, slovenly deadbeat who was single-handedly destroying the neighborhood's prestige. It was a brilliant and vicious lie. My cabin was rustic, yes, but I had been working tirelessly to repair and maintain it. The only disrepair was the damage her own landscapers had caused. The comments section, populated by her loyal cronies and easily spooked neighbors, quickly devolved into a frenzy of speculation. Is it the old Reed cabin I heard he's just some broke professor? He probably can't afford the HOA fees. It's a disgrace. That property is a prime lakefront lot. It should be torn down and replaced with something suitable for our community. Janice, of course, fanned the flames. The board is exploring all of our legal options, she would reply, cloaking her personal vendetta in the language of official due process. We must protect the investment of all our homeowners. She was building a public case for what I now began to suspect was her true endgame, not just to force me out, but to seize my property. My cabin sat on one of the best lots on the entire lake. It was the last undeveloped, traditional property in a sea of modern McMansions. It was a prime target for a developer, and Janice, I was beginning to realize, was a developer in HOA president's clothing. The digital slander had a real and immediate effect. The few neighbors who had remained neutral now treated me with open hostility. My quiet walks were now punctuated by muttered insults and aggressive glares. I was completely and utterly isolated, an enemy of the state in Janice's tiny, tyrannical republic. I did not engage online. I simply continued my work. I created a new section in my file, libel and defamation. I meticulously printed and archived every post, every comment, every lie. It was a nauseating but necessary task. One evening, my sister Amelia called. "Tom, I was doing some preliminary research for you," she said, her voice tight with the professional anger I knew so well. "I ran a corporate search on your HOA president, Janice Kensington. Are you aware that she is the sole proprietor of Kensington Luxury Homes, LLC, a development company that has built the last 5 houses in your community?" I suspected as much, I said, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "It gets worse," Amelia continued. "She's in serious financial trouble. She's over-leveraged, and 2 of her big projects in the city just fell through. She's desperate for a new property to develop, something to generate a quick infusion of cash." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about power or control. It was about greed. She wanted my land. Her entire campaign, the fines, the vandalism, the slander. It was all a coordinated, criminal effort to harass me into selling, or to create a fraudulent pretext to foreclose on my property and seize it for pennies on the dollar. My quiet, historical research project had just turned into a full-blown investigation of a criminal conspiracy. The stakes were no longer just my peace and quiet. They were my home, my inheritance. And Janice Kensington had just made the fatal error of underestimating not just my resolve, but the full, formidable power of the family that stood behind me. Having successfully isolated me and created a public narrative that I was a deadbeat and a nuisance, Janice Kensington moved to her next, most audacious phase. She began to weaponize the local authorities, using a compromised and compliant county sheriff to give her personal vendetta the terrifying official weight of the law. This was the moment our quiet, ugly war escalated into something far more dangerous. The man's name was Sheriff Brolin, a hulking, red-faced figure who had been the county's chief lawman for 20 years. He was a man who, I would soon learn, operated with the casual corruption of a feudal lord, his loyalty for sale to the highest bidder. And, in the small, wealthy enclave of Whispering Pines Lake, Janice Kensington was a very high bidder. Brolin appeared at my cabin one morning, not alone, but with 2 deputies in tow. He did not knock. He hammered on the door with his fist, the sound echoing through the quiet cabin like a series of gunshots. I opened the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sheriff," I said, my voice steady. "Can I help you?" "You can start by paying your debts, Mr. Reed," he boomed, his voice a gravelly, intimidating roar. He held up a sheaf of papers, a formal-looking document with a gold seal. "I have a court order here. A writ of execution for non-payment of legally mandated homeowners association fees. You owe Mrs. Kensington and the Whispering Pines HOA a total of $12,450. You will pay it now, or I will be forced to place a lien on this property and begin seizure proceedings." I stared at the document. It looked official, but I knew it was a fraud. There had been no court date, no summons, no due process. This was a piece of legal theater, a sham designed to terrify me into submission. "Sheriff," I said, my voice cold and hard, "this is a civil matter. It is highly irregular for a sheriff to be acting as a debt collector for an HOA, and I have not been served with any lawsuit, so any court order you have is fraudulent." Brolin's face darkened. He took a menacing step forward, forcing me to step back into my cabin. "Are you calling me a liar? Son, I have a signed order from Judge Miller. It's all legal and binding. Now, are you going to pay, or do my deputies have to escort you off your own property? This was it. The point of no return. The local system was not just unhelpful, it was actively corrupt, a tool in Janice's criminal enterprise. I was out of my depth, out of options. It was time to make the call. That evening, I called my brother, Mark, the FBI agent. I laid out the whole story, from the first fraudulent fine to the sheriff's intimidation at my door. I could hear the cold, professional fury building in his voice as I spoke. "Tom, you're not dealing with an HOA anymore," he said when I had finished, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're dealing with an organized criminal conspiracy, racketeering, extortion, and now, corruption of a public official. This is federal. This is my world." "What do I do?" "Mark?" I asked, the relief of finally sharing the burden almost overwhelming. "You do nothing," he said, his voice now crisp and commanding. "You sit tight. Do not engage with them. Do not leave your property. I need you to be the victim in a crime that is about to happen. I am going to make a few calls. I'm going to talk to a friend in the public integrity section at Maine Justice. We're going to open a preliminary investigation, but we need her to make one more move, one more overt, undeniable act." The final act came a week later. Janice, Brolin, and a man from a local demolition company appeared at the end of my driveway. With them was a large, yellow bulldozer, its engine rumbling, a mechanical monster brought here to destroy my home. Janice held up another fraudulent court order, this one declaring my cabin a public nuisance due to the unpaid debts and its derelict condition. "This is your final chance. Read!" she screamed over the noise of the engine. "Pay the $50,000, that's the original fees, plus legal costs and penalties by noon today, or that shack comes down. We have a court order. It's all perfectly legal." The threat was no longer just a possibility. It was a rumbling, yellow reality, parked 20 yards from my front door. I looked at the bulldozer, then at the hate-filled face of the woman who had brought it here. My quiet, historical retreat was about to be wiped from the face of the earth. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling slightly as I pulled out my phone. I pressed the number 1 on my speed dial. "Dad," I said, when my father's calm, authoritative voice answered, "It's Tom. I'm sorry to bother you at the office, but I need help. Real help. The kind only you can provide." The morning of the demolition was a study in surreal, slow-motion horror. The air was thick with the cloying smell of diesel fumes from the idling bulldozer, a sound that had replaced the gentle lapping of the lake as the soundtrack of my life. I stood on my property line, a single, ridiculously outnumbered soldier defending a doomed fortress. Across the line, the enemy was assembled Janice Kensington, a triumphant, smirking general, Sheriff Brolin, her corrupt, hulking Praetorian Guard, and a small, ghoulish crowd of her most loyal HOA supporters, all gathered to witness the final, crushing act of their queen's victory. Janice looked at her watch, a theatrical, impatient gesture. "It's 5 minutes to noon." "Read!" she called out, her voice dripping with venomous glee. "The bank hasn't called. Your time is up. Have you made your decision?" I just stood there, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. My brother, Mark, had called me an hour earlier. "They're on their way. Tom," he'd said, his voice tight. "Whatever you do, just keep them there. Stall them." "Last chance," Janice screamed, her voice rising to a fever pitch of excitement. "Pay up, or say goodbye to your precious little shack." The bulldozer operator, a large, impassive man, looked at her. She gave him a sharp, eager nod. He put the machine in gear, and with a deafening roar and a belch of black smoke, the huge metal beast began to crawl forward, its massive blade lowered, ready to bite into the logs my grandfather had laid with such care. And then they came. They didn't arrive with sirens. They arrived in a whisper of tires on asphalt. A silent, deadly fleet of black, unmarked sedans that materialized at the end of the quiet lake road as if from a dream. They moved with a speed and purpose that was utterly alien to this sleepy corner of the world. They formed a perfect, intimidating blockade, sealing the road in both directions. The bulldozer stopped. Janice's triumphant smile froze, then melted into a slack-jawed mask of confusion. Sheriff Brolin's hand instinctively went to the butt of his holstered pistol. The doors of the sedans opened in unison, and from them emerged a group of men and women in dark, severe business suits. They moved with the calm, efficient, and deeply menacing aura of people who possessed an authority that made a county sheriff look like a mall cop. From the lead car, my family emerged. My brother, Mark, was in the lead, his face a mask of cold, professional fury. My sister, Amelia, was beside him, a thick leather briefcase in her hand. My mother, her expression one of quiet, maternal rage, followed close behind. And last, my father, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, stepped out of the car. He didn't hurry. He moved with a slow, deliberate gravity, the quiet center of the storm his family was about to unleash. Mark strode directly up to the stunned Sheriff Brolin, flipping open a credential holder. "Special Agent Mark Reed, FBI," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Sheriff Brolin, you are being detained for questioning in a federal public corruption investigation under color of law. You will give my agents your sidearm and your badge." Now, two FBI agents flanked Brolin, who suddenly looked very small and very scared, his face the color of wet cement. Amelia, meanwhile, walked directly up to the speechless Janice Kensington. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened her briefcase and produced a document so thick it looked like a phone book. "Ms. Kensington," she said, her voice the sharp, precise instrument of a litigator, "you have been served. This is a federal lawsuit filed under the Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act, the RICO Act. My client, Mr. Thomas Reed, is suing you, your construction company, the Whispering Pines HOA, and your co-conspirators for engaging in a criminal enterprise to commit fraud, extortion, and intimidation." My mother, the prosecutor, was already conferring with another group of agents, pointing towards the bulldozer, towards Janice's car, towards the collection of stunned HOA members, directing the preservation of what was now a federal crime scene. Finally, my father walked forward. He stopped in front of the hollow, broken shell of Janice Kensington. He looked at the bulldozer, then at my small, beloved cabin. He then looked at her, and his voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried the immense, crushing weight of the entire United States government. "Ms. Kensington," he said, his voice a quiet, terrible thing. "You have threatened my family. You have corrupted a public official, and you have attempted to use the law as a weapon for your own criminal enterprise." He paused, his eyes boring into hers. "You have just declared war on the United States Department of Justice, a war you cannot possibly win." The aftermath was not a single event, but a systemic cleansing. The arrival of the Department of Justice at Whispering Pines Lake was like the flipping of a switch, illuminating years of darkness and corruption in a single, brilliant flash of federal power. Janice Kensington's world did not just collapse. It was systematically dismantled, seized, and entered into evidence. She, along with Sheriff Brolin and a half-dozen of her co-conspirators on the HOA board and in the county government, were arrested on a sweeping indictment of federal charges. The RICO case, built on the foundation of my meticulous file and brought to life by my family's collective expertise, was an open and shut case. The investigation revealed a sprawling criminal enterprise Janice had been using the HOA as a tool to depress property values with fraudulent fees and targeted harassment, allowing her to acquire land cheaply for her development company, all with the protection of a corrupt local sheriff. Faced with an unassailable mountain of evidence, they all pleaded guilty. Janice was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, stripped of every last cent of her ill-gotten gains. Sheriff Brolin received a similar sentence, his career ending in the ultimate disgrace. The Whispering Pines HOA was dissolved by federal court order. The entire community was placed under the management of a court-appointed trustee, tasked with unraveling Janice's web of corruption and establishing a new, fair, and transparent system of governance. The fraudulent fees were all voided, and the money that could be recovered from Janice's seized assets was returned to the homeowners she had extorted for years. The story of the quiet history professor and his family of legal eagles became a local legend, a cautionary tale about a bully who picked a fight with the wrong quiet man. The community, freed from the grip of their tyrant, began to heal. They were, to my surprise, deeply and sincerely apologetic for their complicity in my harassment. In the end, my family helped me rebuild. My grandfather's cabin, which had stood on the brink of destruction, was lovingly restored, its historic character preserved. The project was a strange and wonderful thing. My father, the deputy AG, measuring boards while my brother, the FBI agent, hammered nails. My sister and mother planting a new garden where the old one had been destroyed. I sit on my porch now. The quiet of the lake finally a real and lasting thing. My book on local history is almost finished, and it has a fascinating new chapter on the quiet corruption that can fester in small places. I had come here to escape my family's world, to find a peace that was separate from them. But I had learned that my family, and the powerful, unshakable system of justice they represented, was not something to be escaped. It was a part of me, and the peace I had found was not in spite of them, but because of them. My sanctuary was safe, not because I had hidden it away, but because it was, and always had been, protected by the quiet, formidable power of the law.